She hadn't even stepped off the porch when he said, "Work's not what I'm offering," and closed the distance between them with a look that felt more like a decision than a question. So why did it sound like he already knew she had nowhere else to go? The wind shoved against her back as if it meant to make the choice for her. Lila kept her boots planted on the warped porch boards, one hand gripping the strap of her worn bag, the other still raised from knocking. The man in the doorway didn't move aside, didn't soften, didn't ask her name. Behind him, the house stood quiet, too quiet for a place that was still lived in. She could leave. The trail was still there, but the way he watched her, steady, certain, made it clear he wasn't offering shelter. He was offering something else, something that would follow her long after the snow melted. She drew in a breath, held it, and did not step back. Would you have stayed or turned into the storm? The wind came down off the San Juan peaks like it had something to prove. It scraped across the frozen trail, lifting loose snow and driving it low along the ground, stinging anything that stood in its way. By the time Lila Mae Carter reached the last bend before the ridge, she had stopped feeling her fingertips. She kept her hands tucked tight beneath her shawl, one of them curled around the strap of her canvas bag, the other pressed flat against her ribs as if it might hold the heat in. Her boots were not made for this kind of road. The leather had cracked along the sides, and each step pushed cold through the seams. Still, she did not slow. There was no point in saving strength when there was nowhere else to spend it. The trail dipped, then rose again, and through the shifting gray of snow and sky, the ranch came into view. It sat low against the slope, a long timber house with a sagging porch and a fence line that had been repaired more than once and not always well. A barn leaned to one side, its roof patched with mismatched boards. Smoke lifted from the chimney, thin but steady. Lila stopped, not for long, just enough to take it in, to measure the distance between where she stood and what might be waiting there. Behind her, the trail had already begun to disappear under fresh snow. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder and walked on. The gate hung open by a single hinge. It creaked when she pushed it, the sound carrying across the yard. No dog barked. No one called out. Only the wind answered, rattling something loose against the side of the barn. By the time she reached the porch, her breath had gone shallow. She stood there a moment, not moving, letting the ache in her chest settle into something she could carry. Then she lifted her hand and knocked. The sound landed hollow against the wood. Once, then again. For a moment, nothing. Then the latch turned. The door opened just enough to let out a strip of lamplight, and a man stepped into it. He filled the frame without trying to. Tall, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that came from years of lifting, hauling, working against land that did not give easily. His shirt was plain, sleeves rolled, forearms marked by old cuts and fresh ones alike. He did not lean against the door. He did not step forward. He simply stood there, as if the house ended at him. His eyes moved once from her face to her boots, to the bag at her side, then back again. No greeting, no question. Lila felt the cold climb higher under her clothes. She swallowed, and when she spoke, her voice came out thinner than she intended. "I'm looking for work." The wind pushed at her back, urging her forward, but she stayed where she was. "I can cook," she went on. "Clean, mend. I've worked long days before. I won't be trouble." The man did not answer right away. His gaze stayed on her, steady, weighing without hurry. There was no softness in it, but there was no heat either. Just a kind of stillness that made the air between them feel tighter. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, not from laughter, but from squinting into sun and wind. His jaw was set in a way that looked less like anger and more like habit. Finally, he spoke. "No wages." The words were flat, Not unkind, not kind. Lila's fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. She nodded once, too quickly. I can work for board, she said. Through the winter. That's all I need. The man's eyes shifted again, taking in the patched dress. The mud dried along the hem. The way she held herself upright even as her shoulders trembled under the weight of the cold. Something in his expression changed. Not softer, just decided. There's one place here, he said. He moved his hand from the edge of the door, letting it open a fraction more. Warm air slipped out, carrying the faint smell of coffee and wood smoke. Wife. The word settled between them, heavier than the wind. Lila did not move. For a moment, the sound of the storm seemed to fall away, leaving only the quiet of that doorway and the man standing in it. She searched his face for something, a hint of mockery, a flicker of a smile, but found none. His gaze held steady, as if he had said nothing unusual at all. Behind him, she caught a glimpse of the room. A table, 3 chairs, one pulled closer than the others. A coat hung on a peg near the wall, worn thin at the cuffs. This was not a joke. Her breath came out slow, a thin line of white between them. I didn't come for that, she said. Her voice was steadier now, though her hands had begun to shake again, not entirely from the cold. The man nodded once as if he had expected the answer. Didn't say you did. He did not close the door. The wind pushed harder, tugging at her skirt, slipping under her collar. Lila felt it bite deeper, down to the bone. She glanced past him again, at the narrow slice of warmth, at the stillness inside that stood in such sharp contrast to the storm outside. Then she looked back at him. He had not moved, not a step closer, not a step back. Just waiting. The trail behind her was gone now. The sky had lowered, and the snow had begun to fall thicker, swallowing what little shape the land still held. Lila drew in a breath that burned all the way down. I'll need a room, she said. The words came slowly, each one placed where it would stand. My own, and I won't work as a servant. A pause. If I stay, I decide how the house runs. Food, supplies, what gets used and what doesn't. The man watched her, that same quiet weight in his eyes. The wind rattled the loose board on the barn again, sharp and sudden. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped back. Not far, just enough to clear the doorway. Then don't live like one, he said. The space inside opened. Warmth reached her, thin but real. Lila stood there 1 heartbeat longer. Then she picked up her bag, crossed the threshold, and stepped inside. Behind her, the door shut, cutting off the wind as if it had never been there at all. The quiet hit first. Not the kind that settles gentle, but the kind that waits, thick, untouched. Lila stood just inside the door, letting her eyes adjust to the dim. The room was wider than she expected, built solid with beams that had held through more than one hard winter. A table sat in the middle, worn smooth along one edge. 3 chairs, one pulled close, its back polished by use. The other 2 sat farther out, as if no one had claimed them in a long while. She set her bag down near the wall but didn't open it. The air smelled of old wood and coffee gone cold. Something faint under that. Lavender, maybe. Or what was left of it. Silas moved past her without a word, crossing to the stove. He poured what was left in the pot into a tin cup, took a drink, then set it down again. The movement was simple, practiced, like a man used to doing things alone. There's a room off the hall, he said, not looking at her. Door sticks. You'll need to lift it a little. Lila nodded, though he didn't see it. She picked up her bag and walked further in. Her boots left damp prints on the floorboards. No one said anything about it. The hallway was narrow, lit only by what slipped in from the front room. She found the door he meant. When she pushed, it caught just as he'd said. She shifted her weight, lifted slightly, and it gave. Inside, the room held a bed, a small washstand, and a single window rimmed with frost. And a dress. It hung on a hook behind the door. Faded blue, the fabric worn thin at the sleeves, not tossed aside, not forgotten, just left. Lila stood still a moment, then stepped in and closed the door halfway behind her. She set her bag on the bed and opened it just enough to check its contents. The folded shirt, the extra stockings, the small tin wrapped in cloth, and the notebook. She touched the cover once, then closed the bag again. No need for that yet. Back in the main room, the fire had been stirred. A faint crackle filled the silence. Silas had moved to the far wall, working at something on a bench, tools laid out in a line, each in its place. He didn't look up when she returned. Lila moved to the table. She ran her fingers along the edge of it, feeling the grooves worn into the wood. Then she pulled one of the unused chairs closer. It scraped softly against the floor. Silas's hand paused for a fraction of a second, then kept working. She didn't sit. Instead, she reached for the cloth hanging by the stove, dipped it into a basin, and began to wipe the table. Slow, even strokes. Not rushing, not asking. The water turned gray almost at once. She rinsed the cloth and went again. The sound of it, cloth against wood, filled the space where conversation might have been. A small shift of movement caught her eye. At the far end of the hallway, just beyond the edge of light, someone stood. A boy. Thin, still as a fence post. Dark hair falling across his brow. In his hand he held a small wooden knife, carved rough but smooth at the handle from use. His eyes stayed on her. Lila didn't speak. She set the cloth down and rested her hands on the table, palms flat. Let him see them empty. The boy took a step forward, then another. He came just close enough to the edge of the table, then stopped. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, he reached out and placed the wooden knife on the table. Not offering, not giving, just placing. His fingers stayed on it a second longer than needed. Then he pulled back. Lila looked at it. The blade was dull, edges rounded. A child's carving. Something made to be held more than used. It sat angled wrong, the handle turned away. She reached out, not quick, not slow, and turned it. Just enough so the handle faced him again. Then she slid it back across the table. The boy watched her hand the whole way. When it reached him, he took it without a sound. His grip tightened around the handle, but he didn't step back. From the bench, Silas had gone still. He didn't turn, didn't say a word, but the room had shifted, just enough to feel. The boy stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back down the hall. Not fast, not hiding, just gone. Lila picked up the cloth again and finished the table. She moved to the shelf next, straightened a jar, set a cup upright, brushed dust from the edge of a window frame. Each movement small, careful, as if the house might notice. When she finished, she poured water into the kettle and set it over the fire. Only then did she sit. Silas came to the table after a while. He pulled out the worn chair and lowered himself into it. The wood creaked under his weight. He looked at the table once, at the clean surface, at the cup she had set near his hand. Then he picked it up, drank, set it down again. That was his, he said after a moment, nodding toward the hallway. Lila didn't ask who. She already knew. He doesn't talk, Silas added. His voice was the same as before. Flat, stated, not explained. Lila nodded once. I won't make him, she said. Silas's eyes lifted to hers, as for the first time since she'd come inside. He held her gaze a second longer than expected. Then he looked away. The kettle began to hum softly on the stove. Outside, the wind had not stopped. But inside, something had. Just enough to let the quiet breathe. Morning came thin and pale through the frosted window. The fire had burned low, leaving a bed of gray ash and a faint warmth that clung close to the stove. Lila was already up. She moved slow, careful not to wake what little peace the house had settled into overnight. She poured water from the bucket into the kettle, set it back on the iron ring, then stepped outside to the well. The cold hit sharper in daylight. The yard stretched wide and empty, the fence line half buried under drifted snow. A set of hoof tracks led out toward the ridge, fresh. Silas had already gone. She pulled the rope, hand over hand. The pulley creaked. The bucket came up heavy, water sloshing over the edge and freezing where it touched the wood. Inside again, she set the kettle to heat and found a sack of flour near the wall. It had been tied loose, folded back without care. She straightened it, measured what she needed, and began to work the dough. No wasted motion. When the door opened again, it came with a rush of cold and the smell of horse and leather. Silas stepped in, snow on his shoulders, reins looped in one hand. He stamped once on the threshold, then hung his coat on the peg by the door. He paused when he saw the table. Flour laid out. Dough set to rise. 2 cups placed near the edge. He did not comment. Instead, he crossed to the basin, washed his hands, and dried them on a cloth she had hung fresh. "We go to town," he said after a moment. Lila looked up. "When?" "Now. Supplies." He reached for his coat again. Lila wiped her hands, pulled on her shawl, and took her bag without opening it. She did not ask what was needed. She followed. The wagon stood near the barn, one wheel sunk slightly where the ground had thawed and frozen again. Silas checked the harness, tightened a strap, then climbed up without offering a hand. Lila stepped onto the wheel brace and pulled herself in. They rode without speaking. The trail into Red Hollow Crossing cut between low hills, the snow thinning where the wind had scoured it away. Pine trees stood dark along the edges, their branches heavy with frost. By the time the first buildings came into view, the sky had cleared enough to show a pale strip of blue. The town was small, a row of wooden fronts facing the main road, a hitching post out front of the general store. Smoke rising from 2 chimneys. As the wagon rolled in, heads turned. Not all at once. One here, another there. A man stepping out of the saloon door, pausing mid-motion. A woman at the pump lifting her gaze, then lowering it again. Silas didn't slow. He pulled the wagon up beside the store and set the brake. Lila climbed down after him, her boots hitting packed dirt instead of snow. It felt different. Too solid. Inside, the store smelled of grain, tobacco, and oiled wood. Behind the counter stood a man with a narrow face and a vest pulled tight across his chest. Harold Whitaker. His eyes moved first to Silas, then to Lila. He didn't smile. "Boone," he said. "Didn't expect you in so soon." Silas stepped forward, set a folded paper on the counter. A list, written in a rough hand. "Flour, salt, kerosene," he said. Whitaker glanced at the paper, then back at Lila. "New help?" he asked. Silas didn't answer. Whitaker's gaze lingered a second longer than needed. Then he turned, began to gather items from the shelves. "No credit this time," he said over his shoulder. "Ledger's full as it is." Silas reached into his coat, set down a few bills, folded, worn. Whitaker counted them slow. Lila moved along the shelves while they worked. She picked up a small sack of beans, checked the weight, then added it to the pile without asking. Whitaker noticed. His eyes narrowed just a fraction. "She runs your kitchen now," he said. Silas didn't look at him. "She runs what she needs to." Whitaker let out a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's so." The bell over the door rang. A man stepped in, coat dusted with snow, badge pinned low on his vest. Sheriff Dale Mercer. He took his hat off, shook the snow free, then looked around the room. His eyes stopped on Lila. Held there. "Morning," he said. No one answered right away. He stepped closer, boots slow on the floorboards. "Haven't seen you before," he said to her. Lila met his gaze, didn't drop it. "No reason you would have." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded once. "Passing through?" "Working," she said. Mercer glanced at Silas. "Since when?" Silas picked up the sack of flour, set it into the crate without looking up. "Since now." Mercer's eyes shifted back to Lila. "There was a place east of here," he said. "Transport outfit. Lost a man not long ago." Lila's fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. "I heard," she said. Mercer watched her a second longer. Then his gaze dropped to the edge of her bag. The flap had shifted just enough. A corner of paper showed, marked, lined with numbers. He didn't reach for it, didn't ask. But he saw. Whitaker saw him see. Silas set the last item into the crate and straightened. "That all?" he asked. Whitaker nodded, slower this time. Silas picked up the crate. "Come on," he said to Lila. They stepped out into the cold again. The air felt tighter now. Lila climbed into the wagon, sat without speaking. Silas took the reins. As they pulled away, the town watched. No one called out. No one waved. Just eyes following until the wagon turned past the last building and onto the open road again. For a long stretch, neither of them spoke. The sound of the wheels over frozen ground filled the space between them. Silas's hands held the reins steady, but tighter than before. Lila kept her bag close and did not open it. The wind changed that afternoon. It came in lower, sharper, slipping under the eaves and pressing against the walls with a steady force that didn't let up. By dusk, the sky had turned a hard gray, and the ridge beyond the barn disappeared into it. Silas had already gone out. He said nothing before he left. Just took his coat, checked the rifle by the door without lifting it, and stepped into the yard with a length of rope in his hand. The gate swung once behind him, then settled. Lila stood at the window longer than she meant to. The kettle rattled on the stove. She turned back, poured what little coffee remained into a cup, and set it on the table where he usually sat. It went cold. By the time the light faded, the storm had settled in full. Snow came sideways. The barn roof groaned under it. Something loose banged against the far wall, again and again, until it sounded like a heartbeat out of place. Ezra sat near the hearth. He hadn't moved much since sunset. The wooden knife rested across his lap, both hands wrapped around it. His eyes stayed on the door. Lila lit another lamp, set it closer to the window. Waited. The minutes stretched, then longer. She stepped to the door once, opened it just enough to look out. The wind hit hard, cutting through the gap and pushing snow across the floorboards. She saw nothing beyond the yard. Not the fence, not the trail. She closed it again, stood there, then turned back inside. Ezra hadn't shifted. Lila crossed to the chair beside him and knelt just long enough to meet his eyes. "Stay by the fire," she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. She rose, took her coat from the peg, and wrapped the scarf tight around her neck. Her hands moved quick now, not hurried, just certain. At the door, she paused, looked once more at the boy, then stepped outside. The storm swallowed her in one breath. The cold struck fast, not gradual, immediate. She leaned into it, one hand shielding her face, the other stretched forward to feel for direction. The yard had lost its shape. Only the outline of the barn stood, dark against the shifting white. She moved toward it. Her boots slipped twice before she found the packed ground near the fence line. The wind howled louder here, running straight down the open stretch. "Silas!" she called once. The sound vanished. She kept moving. Step, slide, step again. Her hand hit the fence rail, cold wood under her palm. She followed it, fingers dragging along the rough edge until it dipped, then stopped. Something lay against it, half buried, dark against the snow. She dropped to her knees. Silas. He was on his side, one arm caught in the rope, the other curled under him. Snow had gathered along his back, frozen into the folds of his coat. His breath came shallow, barely visible. His hand still held the rope, even now. Lila pulled at it first. The knot was tight, fingers stiff with cold. She worked it loose, her hands shaking, then pressed her palm against his shoulder. "Silas?" No answer. She shifted her weight, got her arm under him, and pulled. He was heavy, not like lifting a sack or a crate. This was weight that resisted, settled deep. She braced her feet, leaned back, and dragged him an inch at a time across the packed snow. The wind pushed against her, then with her, never steady. She slipped once, went down hard, the cold cut through her coat. She got up again, pulled, again. By the time the barn came into shape beside her, her breath had turned ragged. Her arms burned, but she didn't stop. The door hung open just enough. She kicked it wider, dragged him inside, and let the wall block the worst of the wind. For a moment, she leaned there, catching what breath she could. Then she pulled again, out of the barn, across the yard, toward the house. The door burst open under her shoulder. Warmth met them, thin but real. Ezra stood there. He hadn't moved from the fire, but he was closer now, just a step from the door, his eyes fixed on his father. Lila dragged Silas inside, shut the door with her heel, and pulled him across the floor to the nearest open space. "More wood," she said, not looking up. Ezra didn't answer, but a second later she heard the scrape of logs against the hearth. The fire flared. Lila worked fast. She pulled off Silas's coat, the fabric stiff with ice. His shirt beneath was damp, clinging to his skin. She found a blanket, wrapped it around his shoulders, then reached for the basin. Water. Cloth. She cleaned what she could see, a cut along his arm. Nothing deep, but enough. His skin was cold under her hands. Too cold. She rubbed his hands between hers, pressing warmth back into them, then moved to his chest, feeling for the rise and fall. Still there. Faint. But there. "Stay with me," she said, quieter now. Not a command. Something closer to a request. His eyes moved once. Barely. Then stilled again. Ezra stepped closer. He stopped at the edge of the light, the wooden knife still in his hand. Lila didn't look at him. She kept working. Cloth. Fire. Breath. Time slipped. Then, slowly, Silas drew in a deeper breath. His chest rose. Fell again. His hand moved. Just enough to find her wrist. He didn't hold it. Just rested there, as if to mark where she was. Lila let her hand stay under his. Didn't pull away. didn't speak. Across from them, Ezra watched. And for the first time since she had come through that door, he took one step closer than before. The storm broke sometime near morning, not all at once. The wind eased first, dropping from a howl to a long, tired breath. Snow still fell, but softer now, drifting straight down instead of sideways. By the time light pushed through the window, the world outside had gone quiet. Inside, the fire had been kept alive. Lila sat in the same chair, one hand still resting beneath Silas's. At some point in the night, she had leaned back, eyes closed, but not fully asleep. The room held the kind of stillness that comes after something has passed through and left its mark behind. Silas stirred. It was slight. A shift in his shoulder. A breath drawn deeper than before. Lila opened her eyes. His hand moved again, this time with purpose. Fingers tightening just enough to be felt. She didn't speak. He blinked once, slow, then again. His gaze found the ceiling first, then turned, settling on her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he pulled his hand back. Not sharply, just enough to rest it against his chest instead. "You shouldn't have gone out," he said. His voice was rough, dry from cold and sleep. Lila stood, reaching for the kettle. "If I hadn't," she said, "you wouldn't be here to say that." She poured water into a cup, held it out. He looked at it, then at her, before taking it. Their fingers brushed. He didn't pull away this time. Across the room, Ezra stood near the hearth, closer than before. The wooden knife hung loose at his side. He wasn't gripping it the same way, not as tight. His eyes moved between them. Silas followed that look. Something shifted in his face. Not soft, not quite, but less closed than it had been. "You kept the fire," he said to the boy. Ezra didn't answer, but he didn't step back either. Later that day, the knock came, sharp, certain, not the wind this time. Lila set down the cloth she had been using to wipe the table. Silas was already on his feet, slower than usual, but steady. He reached the door first and opened it. Sheriff Mercer stood on the porch, Whitaker beside him. Both men carried the cold in with them. "Morning," Mercer said, stepping inside without waiting. His gaze mowed over the room, the fire, the table, Lila, then to Silas. "We need a word." Whitaker stayed near the door, arms folded. "It's about her," he said. Lila didn't move. Silas stepped forward just enough to stand between them. "She's right there," he said. "Say it plain." Mercer nodded once. "There's talk," he said, "about a man east of here, dead under circumstances that don't sit right." His eyes shifted to Lila. "Your name's come up." Silence settled. Lila reached for her bag. Not quick, not slow. She opened it and pulled out the notebook, held it in both hands. "This is why," she said. She stepped forward and placed it on the table. Mercer glanced at Silas, then opened it. Pages filled with numbers, dates, shipments, notes written tight along the margins. Whitaker leaned in. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked. "Records," Lila said, "of what he was moving, what he was hiding." Mercer flipped a page. "And how'd you come by it?" "I kept his books," she said. "He didn't know I kept copies." Whitaker let out a breath through his nose. "Convenient," he said. Silas didn't look at him. He looked at the pages, then at Lila. "Why bring it here?" he asked. Lila met his gaze. "Because I wasn't running anymore." The room held that a moment. Mercer closed the notebook. "We'll take a look," he said. "Until then, she stays in town." Silas shook his head once. "No." It wasn't loud, but it didn't move. Mercer frowned. Boone, she stays, Silas said. On my land. Whitaker shifted. That your answer? He asked. Silas didn't look at him. That's the only one. The silence stretched. Then, a small sound, soft, rough. Everyone turned. Ezra stood beside Lila, closer than he had ever been. His hand reached out, took hers. His fingers were warm. He looked up at her. His mouth moved. The word came broken, but it held. Lila didn't breathe for a second. Then her hand closed around his. Silas watched. Something in his face gave way. Not fully, but enough. Mercer looked between them, then at Whitaker. That's enough for now, he said. He handed the notebook back. We'll be in touch. Whitaker hesitated, then stepped out. Mercer followed. The door closed behind them. The house settled again. Lila knelt slightly, her hand still in Ezra's. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Silas moved back to the table. Saturday. Watched them both. Outside, the snow had begun to melt at the edges of the yard. Water ran in thin lines beneath the fence. Inside, the fire burned steady. No one rushed to fill the quiet. No one turned away from it either. They just stayed. And for the first time, it felt like something meant to last. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It never does out there. It came slow, snow loosening its grip along the fence line, water finding its way back into the earth, the wind losing that hard edge it carried all winter long. The ranch looked the same from a distance. Same house, same barn, same stretch of land that asked more than it gave. But inside, something had settled into place. Not loud, not perfect, just steady. A man who had learned to carry everything alone found himself setting a second cup on the table without thinking. A woman who had spent too long walking away from what broke her chose this time to stay and build something from it. And a boy who had held his silence like a shield, let a single word slip through, and in doing so gave all of them a way forward. No one stood up and called it love. They didn't need to. Out there, love looked like work done side by side, like a door held open without asking, like a hand that didn't pull away when it could have. And maybe that's the thing. Sometimes it isn't about who saves you. It's about who stands with you when there's nothing left to prove. If you had been standing in that doorway, with the storm behind you and a life you didn't choose in front of you, would you have stepped inside? If this story stayed with you, you're always welcome back here. There are more roads like this one, quiet, worn, and waiting to be walked.